हेलो।
जी
हेलो।
भाई साहब। जी भाई
हाँ,
साहब।
मैं ऑडिबल हूँ।
जी भाई साहब, आप ऑडिबल भी हैं, विजिबल भी हैं। अशोक सिंह सर भी जुड़ गए हैं।
अशोक जी, बहुत बहुत आपका स्वागत। बहुत बहुत स्वागत।
धन्यवाद सर। थैंक यू। आई होप
आपका आपका सब
अभी
बच्चों के बीच में आना मैं जितना उपयोगी समझता हूँ, ये इसके लिए मैं आपका कृतज्ञ हूँ। लेट मी इंट्रोड्यूस माय फ्रेंड्स। फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, वार्म वेलकम टू यू and also many many congratulations for clearing your mains exam. आज हमारे बीच में जो अभी जुड़े हैं अपना विषय लेने के लिए, श्री अशोक सिंह जी, आप उनको कम जानते हैं और मैं भी जितना जानता हूं उतना परिचय आपसे कराना बहुत जरूरी है। अशोक सिंह जी बिहार के रहने वाले हैं और ये एकमात्र ऐसे कैंडिडेट रहे हैं यूपीएससी के जिन्होंने बिना इंटरव्यू दिए हुए आईएएस क्वालिफाई किया। और जब ज्वाइन नहीं किया क्वालिफाई करने के बाद, तो यूपीएससी के रिप्रेजेंटेटिव इनके घर पहुंचे, क्योंकि उनको अजीब ये लग रहा था कि इसका करें क्या कैंडिडेट का कोई ऐसा प्रोविजन नहीं है कि अगर आपने इंटरव्यू नहीं दिया तो आपको सिलेक्ट नहीं करेंगे। और ये उनको अपने घर पे मिले और वहाँ उन्होंने दरवाज़ा खोला तो ये बिल्कुल अपने साधारण घर वाले वेश में खड़े थे। तो उन्होंने कहा, आप अशोक सिंह जी से हमें मिलना है? उन्होंने कहा, हाँ मैं हूँ। तो उन्होंने कहा, आपको पता है आपका क्वालिफाई हो गया? यस। उन्होंने कहा, हाँ हो गया है। तो उन्होंने कहा कि फिर कल नहीं, मुझे ज्वाइन नहीं करना है। तो ये इस प्रकार के व्यक्तित्व हैं और मैं बहुत कम ऐसे व्यक्तित्व मुझे अब तक मिले हैं जिनकी कंप्यूटर मेमोरी है, यानी गया तो गया मेमोरी में, बाहर ही निकालेंगे तो निकलेगा। तो कई वर्षों के बाद इनसे हमारा फिर से संपर्क हुआ और इन्होंने मेरा निवेदन स्वीकार किया। तो मैं अब आपका अधिक समय न लेता हुआ और श्रीमान अशोक जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि अपनी बात आपके बीच में रखें। और मैं बच्चों से आप सबसे ये कहना चाहूंगा कि खुलकर आप इनसे प्रश्न पूछें, चर्चा करें, आपको बहुत आनंद आएगा और बहुत तसल्ली होगी। तो स्वागत है अशोक जी, अपनी बात शुरू करें आप। मेरे पास कुछ गेस्ट आए अशोक जी, मैं आपकी इस वार्ता में रह नहीं पाऊंगा, क्षमा चाहूंगा। धन्यवाद। धन्यवाद।
अशोक सर नमस्कार। ये लेक्चर इंग्लिश में अगर आप करेंगे तो सबको कन्वीनियंट रहेगा, या मिक्स लैंग्वेज में, हिंदी इंग्लिश ऐसे?
English. We'll have this in English, right? No problem. So, first, let's begin by making sure that everybody can hear me, because we have set up this system in a hurry here at home. In fact, I have just come here yesterday, so I hope there's no problem with the audio. Anybody? No problems? We just check.
नो प्रॉब्लम।
Yes, everything is audible. Perfectly audible. Good. Now, see, all of you are now through for the interviews. Obviously, you are you are student candidates who have prepared for the main examination. Just a moment, problem. Why unstable? I don't like the headphone type of thing. Now, you're all prepared for the mains. So obviously, you're all familiar with all these, the basic economics topics in general studies. Now, at the interview stage, going into all those factual things of the various policies, programs, etc., is not very relevant. In any case, you're expected to have some familiarity with all those things from your main examination, which of course was also held fairly recently. So what I would like to focus on, I think that will be more useful for you also, will be some of the topics which are currently in the news in terms of discussions in the media, discussions in, well, even discussions in parliament, and of considerable importance, and where there are some sort of controversy is also involved. So in these types of issues and topics, you need to have some viewpoint also. It's not the facts which are more important. Facts are obviously important. You have to know some of the facts, you have to know how things are and so on. But more importantly, you should be able to express some viewpoint if asked, and then defend that viewpoint if necessary. Now, in economics, as in almost all other areas which come up in the interview, things are rarely, black and white. What do we mean by black and white? That means it's not as if you can say that this particular event or this particular policy is all good or is all bad. There could be some positive elements, there could be some negative aspects. Different groups of people might be affected in different manner. It might be beneficial for one category and less beneficial or even possibly harmful in some ways for other category of people. There could be regional divergences also. A policy aimed at, for example, promoting manufacturing in India, PLI type of schemes. These would obviously be highly beneficial for the more industrialized states in our country. Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, and even to some extent nowadays UP. And obviously there would be more or less irrelevant for a state like Bihar, where there is, there's no manufacturing sector at all. Less than 1% of the people in Bihar are employed in any manufacturing or industrial activities. So these regional divergences are there. And that's why I said that nothing is, clear-cut black and white. It's all gray. But in that, you have to have some understanding of the positive as well as the negative aspects and be able to express some view. You don't need to go into great depth on most of these topics, all right? And my focus would be on the broader aspects. You understand what are broader aspects? Well, you can see that in front of you on the screen, the big picture. We'll talk about some of these big picture topics today, which, in some ways or the other might figure in your interview. Of course, there would be a lot of other developments taking place, specifics, which might also be relevant. We won't get an opportunity to go into all of these, right? So with this introductory remarks, let me start. Keep in mind that 2024, India is going to have general elections. The general elections are now coming up. So a country, or at least the political establishment of our country, is now moving into election mode. That's affecting parliament, that is affecting events outside parliament, the media, public mood, and so on. A lot of these topics that we're going to be talking about today would have resonance in election campaigns. The ruling party will try to give a positive spin or a positive express a positive viewpoint on these issues, and the opposition will obviously try to paint it in a more negative manner. So keep these types of things in mind. Now with these, which of course, there's another thing that I would like to say. I think this type of a discussion, Zoom discussion, is not very useful if it is one way. I just keep on speaking. So I think it is desirable that you raise some questions, anything that you have doubts about, or anything that you would like to be clarified. But keep in mind that we can't go into too many details of economic programs and policies here. This is a broad picture approach. So keep that in mind while raising your questions or your whatever comments you want to make. I'd like that also throughout this discussion session, not just at the end. So I don't think that format is very good, that we discuss 10 odd topics and then we take up some things, some queries that you may have. All right. So keep putting them in the middle, and I would like to discuss them. You can put them on the chat box, or you can do it orally also. You can raise your hand and raise your hand virtually and raise some questions. Right. I hope all this is clear. Now, let's take up some of the issues. What's the big picture of the Indian economy today? As we head into 2024 elections, the present government has been in power for 10 years, 2 terms now. This period has been a very difficult period in some ways for the economy, especially in the last 3-4 years. We had the COVID crisis, and COVID was a global crisis, not just India. The various measures taken to deal with COVID, the lockdown, etc., affected the economy very adversely. And again, that was a global impact. It was not limited to our country. Subsequent to COVID, we've had a period of very high inflation. Again, this is global inflation. So this is not localized Indian inflation. This problem has been there in the vast majority of countries worldwide, including the most developed countries like US, the European Union, etc. They have also been faced with severe inflationary pressures. So we had a tough time from economic viewpoint. Yet there is ground for being cheerful in some ways, despite these tough times. Now, what's the big picture of the Indian economy? How is the Indian economy doing today? I'm sure you must be having some idea of this on your own. I don't know how many of you think that the Indian economy is doing well, and how many think that the Indian economy is not doing well. But see, the point here is that this performance of the Indian economy, like many of the other issues that we'll be talking about subsequently also, can be looked at in a positive light. Things are going well. Economy is functioning well. We will take some points why we can claim that the economy is doing well. On the other hand, there are various aspects that can be criticized. So it's that old adage about the glass being half full or half empty. The glass is the same. What differs is how you look at the glass. If you're taking a positive viewpoint, you'll say it is half full. If you're taking a negative viewpoint, you'll say it is half empty. So I think that is the scenario with the Indian economy today. Now, different people participate in these debates. Of course, politicians are most prominent, but we are not going to be talking about politicians here in the economy class in general. This is focus on economic topics. So if you look at people like, say, the chief economic advisor of the government of India. Obviously, he would be giving you a very positive spin to what is happening to the Indian economy. On the other hand, look at Professor Raghuram Rajan, who is also been an important figure in Indian economic administration in the past, governor of the RBI, also an earlier, I think, chief economic advisor of the government of India, and so on. He's been very critical. A few months ago, this was about 10 or 11 months ago, he had said that India is unlikely to even grow by 5% in the current financial year. And he made this comment in a discussion, I think, with Mr. Rahul Gandhi at that time. So this was painted as a major failure of the Indian government, a disastrous economic management. 5% growth is also not likely. The actual growth has turned out to be close to 7%. Professor Raghuram Rajan is in India currently, or rather was, I don't know the exact dates. So he was in India promoting his new book. And obviously he was asked a lot of questions about his projections and predictions about a sub 5% growth and how it turned out to be around 7%. And well, as most people would do, he tried to rationalize it. He said that some things the government turned out to be lucky. Of course, he also praised the government for some of its steps, especially infrastructure. But he said it's also a matter of luck. The world economy did reasonably well, and that helped India also to do fairly well, and so on. But you can see that even distinguished economists have different viewpoints and different versions. Very briefly, to summarize this, let me put it this way. The optimists, those who are optimists about India, those who think that India is doing well, what would they be quoting? They would be quoting, for example, IMF, whose most recent report says that India is a star performer in the world economy. Of course, IMF also has some negative things to say about the Indian economy. But here we are focusing on only the positive aspects. It's a star performer. India will be contributing over 16% to global growth. In fact, there are estimates that this might be as high as 20%. Do you understand what this means? That 16 to 20% of the global economic growth will come from India. China used to contribute a very high proportion earlier. Chinese economy has been in free fall. And at least to some extent, India is making up that slack to some extent. Obviously, we are not comparable to China. We are a much smaller economy than China, even today. No, sorry. The IMF report also says that India is already the fastest growing major economy and will continue to be the fastest growing major economy for quite some time to come. India's rebound from the pandemic has been very strong. The pandemic was a period when the economy was devastated. Employment has surpassed the pre-pandemic level. And a lot of other positives. On the other hand, if you look at those who are critical, they would talk about the continuing high inflation, especially of food products, So you occasionally hear about onion prices going up or garlic prices going up. Now, onions, garlic, etc., do have some role in the consumer price index. High unemployment among youth. In fact, this interesting episode last week of people, two persons jumping into the Lok Sabha and others shouting slogans outside the parliament building is being linked with unemployment. That these are frustrated youth who are unemployed and who are trying to express their frustration in parliament. They feel that the political establishment is ignoring these issues, especially the government. They are trying to bring these issues up. So these types of incidents can be cited as evidence for high level of unemployment, of people being disappointed, growth not bringing benefits to many. We do have growth, but it's not benefiting everyone. It's not benefiting a large group of people. And there's also some criticism about Indian data being fudged. So some people are even going around saying that, you know, this near 7% claim, 6.5% claim is actually fudged. This is based on falsified data. So they said you can look at it both ways. It is true that India is growing rapidly. India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. But at the same time, there are many problems that remain. Employment is not growing as rapidly as the GDP. I hope you have this understanding from your studies earlier that employment will grow slowly, partly because productivity will rise. So we are not just focused on growth, but also increasing productivity. But as productivity goes up, that means employment will lag the GDP growth. We need to increase the productivity in the economy. Employment ultimately has to grow. Ultimately, people will benefit from economic growth if they get good quality jobs. That is important. Now, what are the factors that you can say are benefiting India at the current stage? Let's look at some of these factors. Again, these are things that you should be familiar with, but I'll nevertheless briefly comment on some of these. See, the government has focused a lot on investments in infrastructure and logistics. I think that is paying off now. That is extremely important. This was part of China's advantage. The Chinese government's focus at all levels on infrastructure and logistics. And that's how China became the manufacturing center of the world. Of course, there were other things, including the labor force, good quality human resources, trained people, and so on. Now, India, I think, has lagged behind China, but in recent times, we are moving fairly rapidly. All these expressways that are coming up, the railways, expansion of the railway network, freight corridors, all sorts of other things that I'm sure you're familiar with. This is the key to attracting more and more investment into India. Now, this is something which the central government cannot do on its own. Center, of course, takes the initiative, provides the policy support, etc. But ultimately, the states have to also cooperate. A lot of things are done at the state level. Land acquisition, variety of permissions that are required, right of way, and so on. All these are done at the state level. And most states have realized that it is in their interest, regardless of political differences, that there would be political differences between, say, the Tamil Nadu government and the government of India. A variety of issues, the role of the governor, the reservation of bills, and so on. But on issues like infrastructure and logistics, the state will also benefit if it cooperates. So regardless of who is running the central government, the states would benefit from cooperating in central initiatives in these areas for attracting investments and for creating job opportunities, and also ultimately for increasing their own revenue and then asset revenue. Some states are lagging behind in this. I think one name that I have taken earlier, and the state to which I happen to belong and spend much of my time nowadays in various social activities, Bihar, is obviously the biggest laggard among the big states of India. Bihar, well, focus is not Bihar, but let me just mention in passing that Bihar was an independent country. Bihar would be the 11th largest country in the world in population terms. And it is interesting to note that Bihar is the 11th poorest country in the world in per capita income. I believe it was a country. It's not a country. It's part of India. So Bihar is obviously a laggard in all of this for various reasons. So the states are doing well. I think that's a very positive thing. Now, other factors in India, keep that in mind, which you are familiar with, the demographic transition, the large and growing population, youthful population, structural reforms, particularly this digitalization that has been taking place in India over the last, in fact, more than a decade. I should not say a decade. That sounds as if it is only in the present government's period. Some of these initiatives started earlier. Informal sector becoming more formalized. Business environment improving and steps being taken to improve them. But then also keep in mind that all this is not uniform. There are many states which still suffer from bureaucratic red tape and hassles and so on. They need to improve if they are going to benefit. So India is doing a lot of things well, regardless of politics. So it's not just BJP ruled states. Many of these states are ruled by non-BJP parties. Tamil Nadu, Karnataka are among the leading states, or even Telangana for that matter, has been doing well on many of these indicators. But some of the BJP ruled states have also been done fairly well. Madhya Pradesh, for example, or well, I think I should name Odisha also. Odisha is another state which has been doing very well in the last decade. That's a non-BJP state. So these are the types of factors that are working in India's favor as we seek to accelerate our growth, improve the economic performance of the country, make the country into a global economic power, but also raise the standard of living of the people, create jobs for people. So it's not merely the economy becoming bigger, but the economy becoming more productive, more efficient, people's incomes rising, and standards of living rising. ultimately. But growth is ultimately the key to this. So I think in that sense, we are doing a lot of things right. We need to spread this more widely. Right? Any questions? Let me take a break for 2 minutes just to see if people have any questions. Yes.
Good morning, sir.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Sir, you talked about that India needs to increase the productivity. At the same time, we also need to increase the employment levels. So, sir, you also said that if we are increasing the productivity, that somewhere also has an impact on the level of the employment. It will decrease.
No. Let me just clarify this. You see,
Okay.
if your productivity is going up, then employment growth will lag the GDP growth. You understand this meaning? People are becoming more productive. So let's say 100
Yeah.
people, it's the productivity basically means the productivity per person here, not in terms of capital, but productivity per unit of labor. So if your GDP grows by say 10%, your productivity goes up by about 3%, then employment will go up by something like 7%. That's the idea.
Okay.
But
Okay.
both of these can grow. Both of these can grow. What I said was just that it lags behind. I didn't say that employment will not go up, right?
So there will be a lag. So how can we solve this paradox of the lag? How can we make sure that the lag?
This is not a paradox. This is not a paradox. This is a natural thing. This is natural. This is not a paradox. You see, you don't want people to keep on using the same old technology, low productivity technology, give jobs based on simple manual labor involving no equipment, machinery, or technology. That's not a way to ultimately modernize your country and to improve the standards of living. So you have to have better technology, you have to have better equipment and so on, which means high productivity. And this is true even in agriculture. Even in agriculture, you don't want people just to keep on adopting the same old techniques that they were following since the 19th century. So that's not a paradox. Basically, that means that you need to have a higher GDP growth. So people say that 7% won't be enough for India. India should try for 9 or 10%. And maybe we could reach 9 or 10% in the future.
Sure, yeah.
Get this point, right? Anything else?
Thank you. So there was another question that, so in one of the slides when you're talking about the pessimists, so one of the challenges that India is facing is the data, regarding data fudging or not having the appropriate data or the right data at the right time. So, sir, how can we solve this issue, and what stand should we take on this one aspect of the data availability and the data usage?
Data, lot of data is being collected in our country. It is being released. What I was saying at that time was that there's some people, including some economists, who claim that the Indian government is trying to suppress data which might paint the economy or paint the government's performance in a negative light. Now, I don't think this is true. There might be reasons for delay. Take one example, this census, for example. The census has been delayed. The 21 census was not conducted. Now, that was not basically because data, there were attempts to suppress data, but because of the COVID crisis. Now, after the COVID crisis ended, well, there could have been administrative and other reasons why they decided not to conduct the census, and which will now be held after the next election. So there could be various reasons why we could have data problems in one area or the other. Right? So what should not be done is suppressing data if it's not going according to your political requirements. That's not desirable.
Sure, sir.
Right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Let me see. Somebody some comments in the chat box. Yes, there are somebody's talking about consumption surveys. Consumption surveys are also carried out, and some of the data that you get from consumption surveys are sometimes inconsistent. Some of the data will show that consumption is going up uniformly across social classes. Others show that it's not going up so much in the lower end groups. So in a huge country like India, and with all sorts of difficulties in collection and dissemination of data, you are going to have some sort of discrepancies. But I think these will improve as technology and communication improves. Things are improving. And even in the consumption surveys, the most recent data is showing that even the rural areas are now benefiting. This was one of the problems earlier. The rural consumption was lagging behind in the last couple of years. A lot of these products which were meant for rural areas, the manufacturing growth was slower. But I think more recent data shows that even in those areas, improvements are taking place. And another question is about India's growth strategy being different from China. Now, well, I'll come to China after a short while, because China is now facing a crisis of its own. Right? India's growth strategy, well, is different from China in some ways, but it's also similar in the focus on infrastructure and logistics. I think we're doing something similar to what China had done. China had done this much earlier. India has lagged behind on this, but we are doing it now. And this will help us to attract some of the investment that is flowing out of China.
Sir.
India, well, another question is, yes, the growth is basically contributed by the secondary sector. Secondary sector, if you mean manufacturing and industry, then certainly we are focusing a lot on manufacturing and industry in recent times. All this infrastructure and logistics, Make in India schemes, PLI schemes, all these are focusing on attracting manufacturing to India. So it's not bringing results. That's what it is. It's starting to bring results.
Good morning, sir.
Right.
Sir, I have one question. Like
Yes.
there's this issue of sustainable development, and at India level and global level, we have not been able to find a solution to balance environment on one side and people's aspirations for a better standard of living on the other. So how do we answer such questions? We want to be realistic, and also we want to be like idealistic about environment protection.
Obviously, the only answer is that you have to try to achieve some sort of a balance between the two. You see, you can't sacrifice environment because that means that future generations will have to pay the price for that. If we go for growth at any cost, environmental cost, then a couple of generations later, the world might be unlivable thanks to global warming and climate change. So we can't do that. At the same time, we can't ask people to sacrifice their present in the name of the future. So we are trying to have some sort of a balance here. And one of the important things here is, which I think I'll be mentioning in a short while, is this energy transition that India is trying to undertake. I think that is what you should focus on. This energy transition from the conventional fossil energies to the new and renewable energies. This is considered an important Indian initiative. I think it is producing results. It is producing results. So this is the type of thing that we need to promote further.
Good morning, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sir, going back to the previous topic of the data systems, so there are some other criticisms apart from the usual criticism of fudging. Like inadequacies in the collection of data system, delays, or there might be lags in the data systems, or it might not be properly analyzed. So can you
Yeah.
comment on some of these criticisms, if they're valid, or what are some inadequacies in our data systems, sir?
See, the problem with much of the data is that it has to see, some data would be collected at a literally centralized level. Let's say tax related data. So your GST and income tax, these are fairly centralized. You have very good IT systems here. So that sort of data would be very reliable. On the other hand, much of the data is collected at a very decentralized way. The village, the block level, the tehsil level, and so on, and then up to the district and above. So that's the area where you'll have more problems. Now, I think gradually that would also improve, because there is greater penetration of IT at that level also. Many of these states, even states like UP, would now have IT infrastructure at the block level. So all these things will improve gradually as you improve the administrative capacity also. I think that's the the limited answer that I would give to you at this stage. Right?
Morning, sir.
Yes.
Sir, my question is, since you mentioned that many states are lagging behind in their economic growth, like Bihar, so is it time that we bring states' economy per se into the public discourse compared to the national economy numbers that we keep talking about?
No, I didn't quite catch your question. Yeah. What do you mean by this?
Sir, we
Yes.
generally talk about the national economy numbers, that the national economy is growing by 7%, but we see that various states are lagging behind in their economic growth, like Bihar. So is it that the data systems should be inclined towards calculating the state's economic growth and performance and bringing that into the public discourse?
I think we are doing it. Niti Aayog has been trying to do this and disseminate this type of information. This partly this is aimed at creating competition between states. So it's not as if we are not doing it. The public discourse part, yes, I would agree with you that public opinion should become more sensitive to these types of these types of things also. Again, we don't want to focus unduly on a state like Bihar, but think of it like this. The entire discourse in Bihar is focused on caste census, on greater reservations. You rarely hear anything about the growth rate, the growth performance, per capita income, and so on. So that change, I think, is required, but maybe that change is already taking place in public opinion. I don't know how effective mere caste discourse is now. We'll see that in next year's elections. I think maybe people are also becoming more sensitive or more aware that it's not merely classifying people as backward is not enough to solve the problems of the state. Yeah. Election results, the Vidhan Sabha elections also to some extent show that. I think things are changing. Niti Aayog has been trying to bring this type of information to the fore.
Hello.
Can we move on
Good
now?
morning, sir. Sir, good morning. Just one question.
Somebody is talking about Bihar's current growth rate. You see, the problem with Bihar's current, I don't know which current growth rate you're citing at 10.1. Bihar starts with the poorest base. Base effects have always been important in Bihar. And this 10.1%, I don't think is a figure that I have seen from Niti Aayog, etc. You're citing something which was fairly old. Much earlier, there were figures like this. At one time, Bihar was showing considerable growth. At the present moment, if you look at the fiscal situation in Bihar, again, don't want to spend our time in discussing Bihar. The fiscal situation in Bihar, the Bihar government is highly financially strapped. resource crunch is severe. Public expenditure is there, undoubtedly, but there is little private investment, negligible private investment. But let's not get diverted into Bihar only. So let's
One
move
question,
on.
just last.
Yes, sure.
Sir, in countries like US, the economic debate is more focused on the unemployment numbers rather than the GDP data. Whereas in our country, the debate, both in the public as well as the political sphere, is more focused on the GDP numbers. So, what according to you should be the number one priority for India? Focusing on increasing the GDP number or decreasing the unemployment numbers? Right.
No, I think, see, you will ultimately have to say that we need to balance this. If you just focus on employment, that means you come up with, let's say, Narega type of employment.
Yes.
Narega type of employment is very low productivity employment. In fact, often it is zero productivity employment. And it's ultimately just cash transfers to people, much of it. Now, that is not going to solve your problem in the long run. In the short run, that that has a place. If people are starving, you need to provide them with assistance immediately. You can't tell them to wait for the long run. In the long run, they'll be dead. But if you merely focus on that, you're not going to improve your capacity in the long run. So you are not going to have significant changes coming up in the future. So we need to balance that. And country like India, which is relatively poor, where resources are underutilized, growth has to be the focus. But creating employment is certainly also important.
Thank you.
That's the idea. US would be relatively developed.
Yes.
All criteria. So obviously, they would be much more concerned about employment.
Yes.
India needs to do both. Okay. Now, just one last look at this global view of India. See, and this is what Indian government also keeps on emphasizing. India is on track to become the world's third largest economy. This is what all the leading economics firms like Morgan Stanley, etc., have been talking about. Dates might differ a bit, but there is an expectation that by 2027, India will surpass Japan and Germany. The problem here is, please be clear on this, surpassing Japan, Germany, Britain, etc. in GDP terms is not a sort of, it is a significant achievement, but I would not say that it is something to be satisfied with. Ultimately, what is important is the per capita GDP, the per capita income, etc. Now, India's population is far larger than Germany or Japan and so on. Far larger than Britain. So overtaking Britain, France and Germany, or Britain, Germany and Japan, it's just a GDP data. India does not become a middle income economy because of this. Middle income economy would require significant increase in per capita income also. So keep in mind that this is of limited importance. Often in India, we just focus on this. If somebody asks you this, I think you will have to agree that while this is an achievement, it's not something to be something that we should take rest our laurels on, that we've done this. India is likely to become the third largest stock market in the world by 2030. Once again, this will also be a significant achievement, but of limited importance for many people. How many of the people, what percentage of people in India would be directly concerned with the stock market? I think the number is rising rapidly, but it's essentially middle class. The vast majority of the people below the middle class would not have any linkages or any stake in the stock market. But these are 3 points that we have made here. I think these do have significance. So, India's growth is supported by the global trends, what's happening worldwide, and India's benefits of global offshoring is continuing. It's not going to decrease with labor problems in different parts of the world. Even China is going to be facing labor problems in the near future. Digitalization, I think, has been very, very important, and this energy transition. These you should be clear on if somebody asks you about any of these things. Energy transition, particularly, I think our Prime Minister has focused a lot on this, and I think this shows a good vision for the future. Focus on energy transition, green energy, promotion of green energy, and so on. That these are going to be themes that are going to be important in the coming decades. And this is what will also help us to balance environment with growth with the economy. Okay, so the focus on these things should continue, and I think this is probably a major achievement in the future. Now,
Sir,
yes, go ahead.
sir, one question.
Yes.
Like these days, the European countries especially, they are facing a labor crunch. And so they are on a hiring spree from India and India and other Southeast Asian countries. So if we are asked a question, is population like India's population is a boon for it? So like but these countries having less population but higher per capita income are now facing dire issues. So how, I mean, what should we idolize them, or what should be our growth story?
Idolize what? I mean, see, having a big population, India is now the highest population country in the world, all right? That's even without the census, I think it's now clear. Everybody accepts that India is now number one. China is now second. And India will continue to be number one for the foreseeable future. The point, of course, that the population has to become a resource for the country through things like upskilling, training, education, other human resource development initiatives. So we are lagging behind in that. Now, when we talk about states like UP and Bihar, think of UP and Bihar. Obviously, these are the states where these underutilized human resources are the highest. People migrate from UP and Bihar to all over the country these days. You'll find them in Kerala, you'll find them in Maharashtra, you'll find them in Tamil Nadu, Punjab, and so on.
Yes.
Working there. But these states have not been able to create opportunities for their own population adequately. So population is a resource, but you have to make use of that resource through good policies, especially human resource development policies.
Okay.
So I think that is
Good
the
morning,
simple.
Okay.
Yes. Right.
Sir, while presenting the slides, you mentioned that data fudging is an issue. I think, sir, data approximation is also an issue while citing about the unorganized sector. So how to deal with this data approximation and get the real-time data?
You see, there's a point in one of the slides earlier that gradually the economy is becoming formalized.
Yes, sir.
A lot of these medium and small enterprises are also being brought into the formal sector gradually in different ways. For example, through access to finance, etc. A lot of platforms are developing for financing MSMEs and so on. Government has been giving subsidies for this also. So all that will help to formalize the economy. And once the economy becomes more and more formalized, the data also now becomes much more reliable. So that's a process that will go on. It's not something which is one time. You won't go around collecting data at one time and be happy with that. It's a formalization process which will be gradual. So it's happening. It is happening. Now,
Yes, sir. I think through GST data, and another type of data, it can lead to formalization?
Yes, but not just GST. A lot of the units will not be required to pay GST. They will have GST exemption. But even for exemption, there might be some data required. I
Yes,
think
sir.
more importantly, it will be the financing part. See, MSMEs need a lot of finance, and they have much more difficulty in getting access to finance. So efforts to make finance available to them rely partly on having better data about those MSME units, what they are doing, what they are producing, how many people are employed in them. This type of information will help them to get better finance. And better finance will give opportunities to grow. So it's not just GST, it's the finance part is also important. Finance, not just from banks, but from NBFCs also. Right? Now,
Okay, sir. Thank you.
sure. Now look at this for a moment, because this is also something that has been in the news in the last few months. The moving stock markets. Stock markets are definitely moving. You will be seeing this headlines about Nifty at record levels, Sensex at record level, and so on. And probably this will continue in 2024 also. And by the way, it's not just happening in India. Even the US, Dow Jones, etc., have been reaching record levels recently. China, of course, has been lagging behind here. China, forget about record levels. Many cases, they are going to record lows also. The Chinese economy, economic problems are reflected in the stock market. Economic growth, the economic promise is reflected in the booming stock market. Now, as I said earlier, you see, stock markets earlier were very elitist. Very limited group of people were involved in the stock markets. Now I think we have many more people. There are millions, or I don't know, we don't have numbers, you can check numbers, but there are probably tens of millions of stock market accounts. The middle class, and even in small towns, and sometimes even in villages, there are people who are employing these platforms like Zerodha and Upstock, etc. Now, in some ways, this is democratization of the stock markets and the economy, going down to the lowest level. Plus, keep in mind that a lot of people who may not be directly concerned with stock markets might be indirectly concerned, because the pension schemes, the provident fund schemes, they are also now investing in stock markets. So a lot of people who have no knowledge about stock market is also might be benefiting from some of these, the booming stock market that's taking place. A very relevant point has been made by somebody in the chat box. I think we should add this also. Social stock exchange. This is at a very early stage at the moment. Very early stage. But I think it's a good initiative of SEBI, the social stock exchange. Funding for social causes. And the idea is that you will have more accountability through this. Accountability in terms of how the money is being used, what sort of results the money is producing, and so on. So in that sense, the social stock exchange can also be a good thing for non-commercial activities. Let me just see one other point somebody has made here, which I think should also be commented on. The backdrop of AI and Chat GPT reducing jobs. Well, AI and Chat GPT are not going to reduce jobs immediately. I think it will take several years before they become significant. You see, at the moment, it's the potential that is being focused on. If you look at some of the, I think one of the leading companies had given its results a couple of days ago. Which company was it? I forget which company. But their basic point was that this Chat GPT, AI, etc., these are early days. It will take about at least 5 odd years for even the leading companies to start making extensive use. The other is that a lot of the manufacturing, construction, and other activities are not going to get affected by this. So this would be a long-term issue. It's not something which is, I think, immediately relevant for India. It's not immediately relevant. Right. Now, the other point that I was making, let me repeat this again. Stock market moving is important for all these reasons also. It will expand credit availability. It will help to create new businesses. A lot of businesses are being set up, which are going public gradually, or which at least which have hopes of going public in the future. As people see their stocks booming, they probably will be spending more. Consumer spending will also rise. Global manufacturing share will also go up. So the stock market is something that will benefit the wider economy also. Of course, stock market is highly risky also. So as the saying goes, what goes up must come down. So I won't say it must come down, but it may come down in the future. So you could have negative impact also. But I think even here, people are maturing in our country. Many people, for example, now invest through SIPs in mutual funds. Now that's a good strategy. All these types of changes are also taking place in the Indian economy. And I would imagine that all this would help in the future. Now, there are a variety of risks also for the Indian economy. And we are not talking about the risks of the AI and the ChatGPT types. We are talking about the more localized risks in our own country. Let me take a couple of examples here. Look at this, for example, this OPS versus NPS. Last few months, 2023, this has been an area of debate. A lot of people are demanding that this OPS should be restored. The old pension scheme. Some state governments, some of the Congress state governments, had announced their decisions to restore this OPS. Himachal, for example, or Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh. They had similar ideas. I don't know what will happen now that the government has changed. And the other states also, where similar demands are being made. Central government employees have also been making these types of demands. I hope you have some familiarity with this OPS, NPS. And of course, if you join the civil services, you will also be part of NPS, not of OPS. OPS was from the Government of India, level, it was abandoned in 2004. After that, we've had this NPS. But what is the risk here? What is the risk? The risk is that this populist viewpoint promotes OPS. Government employees feel more safe and secure in the OPS type of system. Now, what sense do they feel more safe and secure? That they have something, it's as you probably know, it's called a defined benefit system. Defined benefit means that you get a certain proportion of your last drawn salary as your pension. So you feel safe. That I'll certainly be getting this much. And it will be subject to revision also. On the other hand, NPS is not a defined benefit scheme. It does not guarantee a certain payout to you. It's a defined contribution scheme. You contribute a certain proportion of your income. Government contributes a certain proportion, let's say 10%, 40%, to this scheme. The money is put into pension funds. It's managed. You have pension fund managers. And then post-retirement, the income that is generated out of the fund will pay for the pension. There could be uncertainties about the pension. How much pension are you going to get? But globally, and this is something that is happening again in different parts of the world, all European countries, United States, and so on. Everywhere you'll find there is a shift towards this type of funded pension plan rather than an unfunded plan, because unfunded means it's an open-ended budgetary liability. The money has to be paid out of the budget every year. And there'll be a rising proportion of budgetary liability. The government will become more and more cash strapped. It won't have cash available for other things, investments, etc. Public investments, we talk about here. RBI has been warning the states that this is fiscally unsustainable if you try to go back to the OPS system. So what we need to do is probably to improve this NPS a bit. Ensure that, in some ways it's quite good already. The management, for example, is well regulated, unlike in, say, some places abroad where the pension funds themselves have collapsed. That's not something that's going to happen in India. I think the overall regulatory system is very good. But nevertheless, it could be tweaked a bit, made slightly better. I don't know whether it's possible to give some sort of a guarantee, but a lot of people have shown that this NPS, if it is well managed, and if the stock markets continue to grow, employees are likely to benefit through this rather than lose out. This might generate greater pension to them than under the old pension scheme. But there would, of course, be some uncertainty about this. The risk is that, the populist approach in politics. And here, I would also make this point that this is something that was decided by Atal Bihari Vajpayee-led NDA government. It was implemented by the Manmohan Singh-led UPA government. And then it has been continued by the Narendra Modi-led NDA government. So there has been a certain degree of political consensus across this. Yet, that populist approaches that abandon OPS, Congress party itself, which implemented this, and in fact, laid down the entire framework between 2004 and 2006, and around 2004 and 6. They are in different states. They probably think that they might benefit in terms of getting the support of government employees by promising to go back to OPS. This type of risk to the public exchequer can become very serious. I think this is one of the risks or one of the problems that you have to keep in mind. You may be asked questions about this. Any questions on this before I move on? Should have some idea. I don't think there have been questions about this in the written exam till now, but interviews, yes, it is occasionally asked. And well, if you are joining the civil services, you will also be part of NPS. One small point is armed forces have been kept out of this. Armed forces still have the OPS system. And interestingly enough, that is true in the United States also. There also, while the civilian employees are all covered by these funded pension plans, the US veterans, the retirees from the armed forces, are covered by a defined pension plan. Presumably, the idea is that armed forces face special type of risks, special type of problems. So something which might be justified for them would not be so justified for civilian employees. Any questions?
Sir,
Yes.
am I audible?
Yes, yes. Go ahead. Hear you.
Sir, I wanted to ask that the pension schemes are only applicable to the government employees, and naturally they don't constitute, the big enough percentage of the population that is working. So how does this, issue is able to get traction in even state and national level politics?
Political terms. Now,
Yes.
see, there are 2-3 issues. Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, for example, they have a much higher proportion of the population in government service, armed forces. Of course, armed forces are still covered by OPS, so in that case, it doesn't matter. So that's one of the things that some states might have a higher proportion in terms of government service. The other is that the general opinion is that government servants can have considerable influence over public opinion. For example, let me take a very simple example. Who conducts the elections? It's the government employees, the teachers, other employees of the state governments. They are the people conducting the actual election. Now, I'm not saying that they are going to start acting in a partisan manner, but they could, if they are angry against the government, they could have some influence on the type of the voting practices and patterns. This is the type of risk that political parties see. It's not so much in terms of percentage of the population that is important.
Right, sir. Thanks.
But be more clear about the economic aspect. The economic aspect, I think, is the key here, and that's what RBI has been focusing on. I think, and I've also made this point that politically, well, Rahul Gandhi, for example, is a big critic of NPS. He's spoken about this a few times, but Dr. Manmohan Singh would never criticize the NPS. He was the person who formalized the whole system. It was during his period that it was formalized. So obviously, he had a good understanding of what this old pension scheme would do to government finances in the future. Mr. Rahul Gandhi would not be concerned about that. Right? And that would be true for the BJP also. State level BJP leaders have also been talking in these terms. So I'm not blaming only Congress leaders, other states, other leaders also. Right? But you understand why this is a risk. Suppose this catches on, then this could be very dangerous in the future. If other states start doing this, it will disrupt the whole system. And by the way, this comment that you made about NPS being limited to government is not quite true. NPS is now open also for non-government sector employees or people, even self-employed individuals can be part of this NPS. And they get taxation benefits out of this. Their contributions to NPS can be deducted from the income. So there are tax benefits. And the government, I think, has been restructuring the NPS system in recent times to make it more attractive. Then you have Atal Pension Yojana, etc., which is for people in the unorganized sector, which is also linked with NPS. So this is something which needs to be expanded. We need to bring in a bigger proportion of the population into these types of schemes in the future. Right, so we move on to one more issue of a similar type, which has also been debated.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Sir, if in the main interview this OPS and NPS issues will be asked, then how to answer? Should we give our answer on the line of government to support the NPS, or can we give any balanced view in line of the Andhra model or something?
This is already a fairly balanced model. This is already fairly balanced. It has to balance the interests of the employees with that of the public. The public exchequer and the budget are not ultimately for government employees and politicians. They are meant for benefit of the public. Let's be clear on that issue. Why does the government employ people? Why does the government employ civil servants? Not to benefit the civil servants, but to benefit the public. The civil servants will be working in the public interest. So the finances of the government has to prioritize public interest. That is the viewpoint that is being taken here. And a system which has been developed worldwide and which is quite efficient and well regulated in our country can produce, as I said, good results, provided you give it an opportunity to do this. You can bring about improvements. For example, improvements can be brought about in pension fund management. Some people say that one of the criticisms that is made is that the returns that are produced are not very good, but that could be improved in different ways. So you can suggest these types of things, but don't suggest going back to the old system in any way. Old system. That would be a disaster for fiscal policy at the state level and the central level both.
Sir, I wanted to know your views regarding these small saving schemes.
All right.
Government has been increasingly relying on these small, saving schemes to fund the, economical expenses. So it has also been criticized. So what is your view on this?
Small saving schemes are generally meant for, again, for middle class, lower middle class, and so on. All right. And particularly for those who come from the unorganized sector of the economy. Often these are people who are from the unorganized sector of the economy, who don't have any good fallback system. So giving them a reasonable return and a safe type of haven in terms of putting their money and from where they can get reasonable returns, I think that is a good public service in one sense. But again, that should not be unsustainable. It should not involve paying such high interest rates that it creates a major burden on the public exchequer. So the government has to balance that. Maybe in future, as other savings instruments develop and as they cover more and more proportion of lower income people, maybe these small savings schemes might become less relevant in the future. But for the moment, I think they have a role to play. They have a role to play in that approach. Right? Now look at these revenues and freebies. This is also often debated. And when elections come up, they will again, remember they were being debated at the time of the previous Vidhan Sabha elections. And now that the Lok Sabha elections are coming up, I think this will again be an issue. This is again, I think, in some ways a gray issue. Why is it a gray issue? Because, I don't think there are any real, in general, people tend to define it the way I have put it on this slide. Look at I must have seen the slide, that people say that investment in public goods is social welfare. It provides public services, which the government should be providing. Distribution of private consumption goods is a freebie. All right. So distribution of private consumption goods, they say, is a freebie. Private consumption goods means, say, providing a bicycle to somebody. That's a private consumption good. That's not a public good. On the other hand, education would be an example of public good, social welfare. Freebies are also sometimes described as non-merit subsidies. The public goods are considered merit subsidies. Right? Now, what has been the debate about this? I'll point out 2-3 examples. One was Election Commission had expressed some concern about this. The political parties are making very extravagant and lavish promises about what they will give the people. without worrying about the fiscal burden. Supreme Court had also taken this issue up. The Prime Minister has been speaking about this, I think, last year and this year. Several states have been taking steps which were considered the Delhi, NCT Delhi, for example, or in some of the other states also. Private consumption goods, free power, for example. Free power, remember, is a private consumption good. If it's power in your home. Health, education are different. But electricity for use in your home is a private consumption good. Now, there are difficulties also in these arguments. And point out one important difficulty to you. See, India, we have traditionally provided food grains, a variety of schemes, PDS, other schemes. Sorry. Some throat problems. These food grains, etc., are also private consumption goods. If you're providing free food grains, people will eat them. It's not part of the public goods. Yet there is almost universal agreement that this is significant. It helps to mitigate poverty, impact of poverty on the lowest income groups, etc. So should these also be stopped? If you are going to say, if somebody argues that we should stop these reveries and freebies, should we stop the PDS and distribution of food grains to the poor? Now, part of this was, of course, during the COVID crisis, but subsequent to the crisis, also these distribution programs have continued. Distribution programs have been extended. Providing, think of a few other examples. Providing free bus rides to people. Several states have done this. I think Delhi has also done this. Free bus rides for women. And in some of the states, Karnataka has also got a scheme of this type. Other states have also been making announcements. Free laptops to students. Now, you can argue in different ways. Free laptops, for example, one argument that can be given is that this is helping to overcome the digital divide in education. The rich and the well-off already have laptops, so why not provide them to the poor also? The free bus rides can help to boost women's mobility. It can help greater participation by women in the labor force. See, you can argue in this way also. That's why this issue, I think, is extremely difficult to decide. I don't think that there is any clear-cut sort of argument, but we have to understand this. Let's go to the next slide. That this is certainly partly linked with electoral compulsions. It is concerned with social justice, that you are trying to benefit those who are poor, those who have low income, who are being affected by high inflation, or who have not had, say, educational opportunities. That is true, but the electoral compulsions are certainly important, because the general opinion is that these types of things are very popular with voters. Anybody who offers this is more likely to get the votes of people. And this can become competitive. Somebody offers, one party offers, say, feature phone to everybody. Another party might come along and say that, no, we'll give smartphones. Now you can end up offering the smartest phone possible to everybody. on the grounds that you are trying to remove the digital divide. So electoral compulsions, competitive politics create problems here, and ultimately the fiscal problems which are related with this. The Election Commission had said that parties which promise these types of things should also then say how they're going to pay for it. The usual answer has been that we will cut down government expenditure. Now, government expenditure on what are you going to cut down? Are you going to cut down the salaries of say, MPs, MLAs, and government servants? What sort of expenditure would be considered useless that you'll get rid of it in order to pay for these types of freebies? So ultimately, it's a resource constraint issue. It affects public investments, it affects capital spending. But there's one more argument, which I think also has some force, that governments often give a lot of tax benefits. The central government, for example, lowered corporate taxes. States also provide tax benefits to businessmen, to industrialists, and so on. So people argue that giving tax benefits to businessmen, to industrialists, and so on is justified in the name of economic growth. But providing subsidies to the poor is criticized as freebie and remedy. You see the difficulty in dealing with these types of issues. Because giving tax benefits to businessmen can be justified in some ways. You are trying to promote economic growth. I think this will be irritating to everybody to hear me coughing and sneezing. But I'm afraid that's the condition. Yeah, the same affects the concentration also. Yes, we talk about the benefits given to business persons. The benefits given to business persons, there is a justification that you are trying to promote investments, you are trying to promote growth, you are trying to promote employment. And if it does produce such results, you have to monitor it to see that these results are actually coming. If they are not coming, maybe you should change your approach. The so-called remedies and freebies. I'll just switch off the mic for a minute. This is, I think. Right, I think I made this point. If you have any comments on this, give me a couple of minutes to recoup myself. Any questions, comments on this issue? What are your views if you want to express this? I think that would be as relevant as what I have said. Yes? Freebie remedy issue.
Sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir, I'm from Karnataka. In Karnataka, the recent government has launched two schemes of providing freebie like power to households under Griha Jyoti scheme and bus. Right. Now, recently, I was going through one of the article. Now, the Karnataka is facing both the power crisis and is importing from the states like Punjab, and another problem on the side of fiscal problem also. So, how to like how to, if the question asks my personal opinion. So in my personal opinion, freebie should not be just like a political agenda. It should have some criteria, like either income criteria or some criteria, how to tell to the panel my opinion on this.
You are right that universal freebies, like say free bus transport to all women.
Yes, sir.
Right now, some of those women may be better off in terms of
Yes.
income.
Yes, sir.
Others might be relatively poor.
And in fact, student colleges are facing too much of problem. They are not getting buses on time because of this.
Because right, so the
Even
demand for
Punjab
buses
is
has gone up.
facing the same
No.
issue, sir.
And the other problem is that, think of it like this, that since you are not charging anything from
Yes.
a big section of the users, so obviously you will not have funding for the transportation system,
Yes,
buying
sir.
of new buses, etc. So that would also be affected. Clearly, you're going to have these types of problems and issues will keep on arising. But as I was saying earlier, the argument would be that we are promoting the mobility of women. We are promoting greater labor force participation by reducing the cost for them.
So in that case,
if this is actually happening, then I think it would still be justified. But you would need to monitor this to find out
yes,
whether this is actually happening. And ultimately, Karnataka government, for example, they will have to pay for the rice that they are providing under these schemes. They will have to pay.
correct.
As you're saying, they are facing a fiscal crunch already.
Yes, sir.
I'll add one more example. I tend to go back to Bihar because I'm from Bihar. But think of Bihar's prohibition policy.
Yes.
Some of you are normally from Bihar. Now,
I'm also from here, sir.
right, so that's also a populist policy. It's a populist policy. The idea is that it's popular among women, particularly. Women were adversely affected by the male members of their family getting drunk and so on. Unfortunately, the implementation of a scheme like this has a lot of side effects which could have been foreseen. There is massive revenue loss for the government on one side, a relatively poor state, massive revenue loss. On the other hand, a lot of liquor mafia becomes active. They make a lot of money out of this. Poisoned alcohol becomes common. A lot of people die on consuming it. So how many of the people for whose benefit this was being implemented are being adversely affected as a consequence? In fact, many of them must be paying much more for that liquor
Right.
now that it's being smuggled. And that too, very unreliable quality of liquor, which will often have methyl alcohol mixed with it. So these types of policies can be populist. This is not directly a subsidy policy, but it is certainly a policy giving up a lot of government revenue. Yet the final impact of it may be adverse for the administration, for the government, for the fiscal situation, even for the judiciary. Bihar courts are clogged with cases involving prohibition. Serious matter, much more serious issues are not being dealt with because the courts are busy only dealing with arrests, etc., taking place under these prohibition laws. So we have these types of problems in different ways all over the country, in different ways. Some states it would be in the form of subsidies. Delhi government, for example, has been providing considerable subsidies. Some of these are justified, but on the other hand, they are short of funds for infrastructure projects. They are unable to pay their share for different infrastructure projects. How do you balance this? Ultimately, we have to have some balance. I'm not saying that there should be no benefit for the poor, but you have to make sure that the important long-term concerns are also addressed.
So,
yes, right.
So, sir, in this case, like how to tell the opinion? I can say, like, instead of giving direct power, free power to the poor, we can go for the renewable energy, providing solar energy thing or the like revenue any sort of renewable energy part? Like, can we suggest like this?
Could do that, but then the point is again that ultimately, renewable energy to whom? For farmers, let's say.
Yeah.
So, setting up, say, some sort of small-scale solar projects in farms. There are schemes for this also. These could be done, but they would also require considerable government subsidies to be viable. But you could justify that as a merit subsidy.
Okay.
As a merit subsidy, there is also helping to deal with environmental issues. You could do this. You can have various arguments can be given.
Yes, sir.
But we need to keep the this fiscal situation also in view, right? So I think that's
Sir, one more thing, sir.
Yes.
Are you aware of any of the state scheme, which can be quoted as an alternative to these freebies and reveries?
Almost all states have variety of infrastructure projects.
Okay.
Say rural roads. Now, rural roads would help to develop rural economic activities, marketing of agriculture and other goods. So certainly, that building of roads like that would be justified for promoting rural economy, rural mobility, and so on. Some of the poorest states provide free cycles or say prohibition. Again, I go back to Bihar because I'm most familiar with Bihar. And the quality of the roads in the rural areas are disastrous. One of my friends has been walking around Bihar. Many of you would have heard of him. He is one of the most well-known political consultants in this country, Mr. Prashant Kishore. I'm sure everybody would have heard of him. So he's been walking around Bihar for over a year now on a Pad Yatra. And one of the things that he told me was that the quality of the roads there is absolutely disastrous in the rural areas. And he's developed a variety of back and spinal problems thanks to walking on those extremely uneven paths. Now, that should have been a priority, not implementing prohibition. And maybe those funds could have been used for this purpose instead of going to liquor mafias. I think all states are making blunders in these ways. Right. Now, a couple of other things that I'd like to add very quickly because you can see.
So one more question, just
right.
So my viewpoint on freebies and these all things are that it is okay if the government gives all these things, but is there any mechanism to check what the country is gaining from giving like free ration, free food? Like if we talk about, I am also from Bihar. If we talk about Bihar, let's suppose there is a family of 5 people, wife, husband, and 3 children. Now let's suppose that because of COVID or any other situation, because of poverty, they were not able to fulfill their 2-time meals, and all the 3 children were employed somewhere as child laborers. But now if the government starts giving free ration and all, then is there any mechanism to check that have those 2 people have they started sending their children to school? Are those children going to school now? So what is the benefit of the society from giving these rations? Like my approach to freebies and is a little tilted towards the Amartya Sen's capacity building approach. Like rather than giving is all right, but there should also be a mechanism to check what the country is gaining from giving these freebies. Is the society benefiting it from this or not? Not in economic sense, but even is it increasing the social capital of our country? Is it increasing the social coherence in our society?
Right. Now, there is a famous program in Brazil. I think it's called what's it called? You can check on the net, Bosnia or something. I forget the name. That involves cash payments to poor families linked with school attendance of the children in the family.
Yes.
Now, this type of thing would be a good idea. Undoubtedly, it would be a good idea. You can say these types of things and check up the name. Check up the name in Brazil.
Yes.
Because that's been quite effective in cities like Rio de Janeiro, etc.
Yes.
Because they have huge slums.
Yes.
there. And many of the slum children got reasonable quality education. But there again, you have to keep in mind, the schools also have to be upgraded.
Yes.
One of the problems, even in Delhi, I'm not talking about Bihar now, I'm talking about Delhi, that the present government of Delhi, NCT Delhi, has focused a lot on building schools. But in terms of staffing, etc., it leaves a lot to be desired. There are many schools which don't have good teachers. Some even don't have principals and vice principals, and all sorts of other problems are there. So that infrastructure itself is not enough. You also need the people who will do the teaching, the manpower.
Yes.
So all that has to be taken care of. That's why it becomes very complex.
It's just that freebies should not put a family into perpetual poverty, like a cycle of poverty. That now the parents are poor, the children will also be poor. Now their children will also be poor.
Right.
So I think the main focus of the government should be to pull that family out of that system, out of that poverty cycle.
Some linkages should be established, right? You can do that. Attempts should be made in this direction. Now, before we end on this, because we are supposed to be going on till about 1 o'clock, one of the other important developments in the last couple of years, and I think that might also be asked about, is this public sector performance. A few years ago, we were all very pessimistic about the public sector. Any GS questions about public sector, you often were very critical about how the public sector worked. Many people think that in the last few years, this public sector there has been a massive resurgence. Public sector banks are now doing very well in terms of profitability and other indicators. This data is from December figures. The 55 PSU companies in the PSU index apparently have a capitalization of over 55 lakh crores. That's a huge amount for public sector companies. Sharp rise in profitability, performance in general, and so on. Of course, not all companies have done well. MTNL is bust. BSNL is being given huge subsidies to survive. But then we must remember that Vodafone Idea also is facing a similar crunch. So it's not as if it's only the public sector phone companies. Vodafone Idea was a leading private sector firm. Air India being sold off to the Tatas, which I think is also a big achievement. Now, initially, public sector companies were not doing very well because most of the NDA investments were going into infrastructure. And infrastructure, the main beneficiaries were private sector. Now, this Atmanirbhar Bharat in the last couple of years and other schemes are putting investments into railways, defense, and other public sector companies. So public sector performance is certainly a major, I would say, achievement in recent times. And this also shows that it's possible to have an efficient public sector. Public sector, by definition, it does not have to be inefficient. This is a big change, and credit for this, to some extent at least, goes to the present government. And this indigenization of defense, manufacturing, and railways is also making a big difference in terms of the public sector. Banks, the merger of the banks has made them more competitive. That again is significant achievement. It was opposed by the workers' unions, but ultimately the banks are not there for the workers' unions. The banks are there for public benefits. The same logic that we're talking about, government. And the reduction in politically influenced decisions on bank lending or benefits to private parties and so on. all these were problems with the public sector in the past. I think these changes have made the public sector much more vibrant, and we are now getting more benefits out of the public sector for the economy and the country. Some of the states have also been trying this. So it's not just at the national level, even in the states, efforts have been made to improve the performance of the public sector companies, transport and other areas. This is also a fairly positive development in the economic sphere. Now, have anything to say about this? Anybody? Public sector? I hope you understand the point. Or let me just move on to a couple of other things. Yes, you wanted to say something?
So you have mentioned professionalization of decision making in PSUs. Can you please elaborate on how it is being achieved?
I think broadly speaking, they are giving more autonomy to these public sector undertakings. Now, see, much of this would be in the form of government policy aspects is one. I'll put it in more anecdotal terms. Anecdotal terms would be this. 10 years ago, many of my friends in the government, one of the ways in which IAS and other services like this, one of the ways in which they would derive extra benefits would be through the public sector concerns under their ministry. They would call up anybody, ask them to arrange vehicles, ask them to arrange hotel transport. And sometimes I was also part of the beneficiary of these types of things. Now, apparently, it's much more difficult. Very few IAS officers would be able to do this today. That would be a loss for you after you join the IAS, but I think it's good for the country and the working. That's what I mean by professionalization. That these things should not be working for the benefit of the government servants, etc. The employees also, especially the higher management, seems to have more genuine autonomy now in terms of their decision making. Of course, a lot of things will still be under the government, under the ministry. A lot of financial decisions would still be made by at the ministry level. There might be some political considerations even today in terms of investments, etc. That would be there, but I think it's reduced significantly over the last decade, which is a good thing. And let me just link it very briefly with Gujarat, because the government is led by people from Gujarat. Gujarat has some of the best public sector companies at the state level. So some people say that Mr. Modi had the experience of those public sector companies, the Gujarat Gas, for example, or a company like GNFC, Gujarat Narmada Fertilizer Corporation, and others, quite a few others. Some of the best state level public sector companies, many of them publicly quoted, with share prices doing very well. So to some extent, that seems that Mr. Modi, as Prime Minister, has moved these ideas from Gujarat to the national level also. I generally don't want to name politicians in this discussion of economy, but in this particular case, that Gujarat linkage, I think, is of some significance. Right. This is the idea. Of course, the details of how it is being professionalized are much more. And even today, for example, there are people linked with the BJP, etc., who have been included in the boards of some public sector companies. But I think these numbers have now reduced compared to the past. In the past, these boards were filled with cronies. Now I think the numbers are much less. And probably these are more professional people, people with a chartered accountancy background, etc., rather than just professional politicians being included in boards. So that's a good thing. I would consider that to be a good thing, that this is changing and improving. Okay. Now, last, just look at this inflation. I think this is again going to be a key thing. Now, these graphs don't really matter, but this is the inflation trajectory that the RBI has projected in its latest meet. Inflation has been a matter of concern worldwide, in India also. All right, now, forget about these graphs in detail. But to some extent, inflation has come under control. Not enough. India wants to take down the inflation rate to around 4% or less. The targeted rate, and you've studied all this. We are still above that targeted rate. It is still fluctuating. It's still fluctuating. So things have improved, but not enough. And in particular, look at the interest rates. Again, you know this. There's the US Federal Reserve interest rates. They've gone up very significantly from 2022 to 2023, very high, almost 0 to just below 6%. India, again, they've gone up to over 6.5%. The repo rate. Now, these high interest rates have helped to reduce inflation. But if you look at the latest monetary policy statement, a lot of people are expecting that 2024 will see a reversal. What's the meaning of reversal? That means interest rates will start coming down. US and later in India also. Now, as you know, high interest rates, they are aimed at obviously checking inflation. But high interest rates also affect investments, consumption, etc. Because loans become more expensive. EMIs rise. So you bring down the interest rates, you will be promoting consumption as well as investment. Growth can be boosted. But that is assuming that inflation is under control. Now, this is part of the reason why stock markets are moving, because stock markets expect that interest rates will be coming down next year. So companies will be doing better. Shares will be more valuable. The difficulty is the RBI has pointed out that there are still some problems. Volatile and uncertain food prices. Food prices are the biggest problem as far as India is concerned. Some food items, because of seasonal and other factors, or because of weather-related issues, shortages develop, and then prices tend to go up. Fuel prices, also there's a lot of uncertainty. Supply chain uncertainties continue. They have improved, but yet there are some uncertainties, and geopolitical risks are considered to be very high. What are geopolitical risks for the economy? One is the Ukraine conflict is still continuing. That's affecting supplies of lots of things. The Gaza conflict, and linked with that, the activities of the Houthis in Yemen and so on, affecting oil and gas transport. Tension between China and Taiwan, China and US, that's also a geopolitical risk. All this can significantly impact the world economy in the coming year. And obviously, some of it will feed back to our country also. It will come back and impact our country also. Fuel prices will be significantly affected by geopolitical risks. So that is why the Reserve Bank is very cautious about not yet projecting reduction in interest rates. They feel that interest rates will have to be maintained at a relatively high level for some more time to come in order to check inflation. Checking inflation, remember, is a priority. Of course, supporting growth is also important. But without checking inflation, you can't really promote long-term sustainable growth. That is the idea here. Any questions, comments on this very briefly now? If you have anything to say on this, go ahead. Because this is also going to be one of the issues in the next coming months. What's happening with regard to interest rates in US, India, elsewhere. Right, and all these like Yes, please.
Sir, I have one question regarding the rising protectionism in the world. So should India become protectionist, or how should India deal with it?
Well, in
Considering
India,
there are so many geopolitical risks
see,
we have.
protectionism is partly linked with the supply chain issue. Suppose we build up a pharmaceutical industry based on APIs from China. Those are the active pharmaceutical ingredients from China. And the Indian pharmaceutical industry is quite important, even in terms of exports. But they rely on APIs from China. Those pharmaceutical ingredients, a lot of them are imported from China. Now, both for political reasons and for economic reasons, the Chinese supply can be disrupted. Now, if it can be disrupted, or it might prove to be unreliable, then you need to try to diversify yourself, maybe to build up your own resources in your own country. So that is one way of looking at it, protectionism. Protectionism is not necessarily only to protect your local industry, but to protect yourself from disruption from abroad. Other point is, again, China. China as an example. China's attitude towards India in recent times has been fairly adverse on different issues. We are not going into all those political and IR related issues. Now, one of the ways in which we can pressurize China, or put at least some pressure on China, is through the economic sphere. That's why we have put a lot of restrictions on Chinese investments in India. We are not only directly targeting China. We have done it in a way that all countries which share land borders with India. So China shares land borders along with Pakistan and Bangladesh. Now, Pakistan and Bangladesh are not going to be investors into India. So if you have a policy which puts restrictions on countries sharing land borders with India, that's going to affect China effectively, not Pakistan and Bangladesh, or Bhutan for that matter. So these types of concerns are also there. It's not only a question of protectionism in a classical sense. Classical sense was protecting the local industry from external competition. But here it's also external disruption that may be caused from external sources.
Okay.
And then, of course, there are a lot of Western companies. Apple, I would say, is the leading company here, which is trying to reduce its dependence on China, diversifying away from China. And that is a big success for India. The fact that Apple is moving a lot of its production lines to India, actually not Apple, the suppliers of Apple. Apple is moving its supply chain away from China, given these geopolitical risks. Now, Vietnam is also a beneficiary, but India is also definitely benefiting out of this. This is obviously good for India. The fact that China is diversification on China is benefiting our country.
Okay. Sir, so like we are in competition with Vietnam right now to grab most of the investments which are moving out of China.
Right.
So like what can we do to gain an edge there?
All the things that we talked about earlier, all that infrastructure, logistics,
okay,
policy certainty. There's one thing that a lot of people have been raising recently. I think you should make this point, that you should have much more stable policies. You should not keep on changing policies at very short notice. This is one of the problems. Many senior government officials have told me that this is one of the big problems with India.
Okay.
That India tends to change policies. The slightest, let's say there's a rise in price of onions. Immediately, India will impose a complete ban on export of onions. Now, that makes it seem as if the government is very responsive. But the problem is that also disrupts global contractual linkages, etc. And it sends a wrong message. Onions might not be very important here. But in other areas also, people feel that this is the type of solution. This is the danger. Now, one last...
Hello, sir.
Yes, any?
Sir, I have a doubt regarding exports ban on rice. since we produce excess of rice, why do you think government decides to ban exports of rice or wheat every year? If we
Rice, wheat, onion, any commodity. You see, the basic idea is that if there is a spike in the prices in India, the government feels pressurized to take some action to show the people that we are responsive. We are trying to deal with the problem. And the easiest way is to put export bans. This is, in general, economists criticize this approach. That you should not take, response to immediate things. Maybe that response can be in a different way. Try to expand the availability in other ways, but don't start imposing bans. I completely agree with you. I completely agree that this is something that is indicative of a very old socialistic mindset. If you are trying to link yourself with the world, you have to assure the world that your policies are going to be stable. They're not going to change at the drop of a hat. Now, please look at this for a moment. Chinese crisis. China is a, we are not about the world economy. We've already talked about world economy in some ways, but this is a problem with China now. Slow growth. Growth has slowed down a lot. 10% growth. Now they'll be happy with 4%. At one time, China was double digits. Record youth unemployment. India is unhappy with youth unemployment. China is even more unhappy. The only difference is that there's no scope for jumping into the Chinese parliament, unlike in Indian parliament. Low foreign investments are declining rapidly. That's part of what is coming to India and to Vietnam. Weak exports, they're slowing down. Currency is weakening. And underlying all this is the property sector in crisis. A lot of the Chinese economy was dependent on the property sector. And many of the leading Chinese companies are now going bankrupt. Evergrande, the biggest of them. We are not going into details of Chinese economy, but China is now faced with a severe economic crunch. Of course, China is such a big economy that even now it is a very powerful economic force, even with all these problems. It's the second biggest economy in the world in dollar terms. It still has huge economic power. 4% growth of a huge economy like China will still be more than 8% growth in India. The Indian economy is much less than half of Chinese size. But for China, this is a crisis. For other countries, this is to some extent a threat as well as an opportunity. Those countries which are closely linked with China in economic terms, they are vulnerable. On the other hand, it's an opportunity if the investments move out, which is what India is seeking to do. An opportunity from the Chinese crisis. And these policies.
One more point in this China's economy time bomb is the rapidly aging population due to its.
That is the demographic factor. But these are the immediate economic factors. That's the underlying demographic factor. But these are not just based on the demographic factors. These are due to a variety of other reasons also.
Right.
The property sector crisis, for example. This is due to a variety of other reasons. Demographic factors will also play a role. But China overbuilt infrastructure. Somebody had raised this question today on difference between India and China. China built huge infrastructure, huge property without worrying about demand. India at least focused a bit on demand. Is the demand there? Don't just create white elephants. China did this. Now, at one time, this boosted Chinese growth. Now it is becoming a major problem for China at all levels. Chinese state provincial governments are now faced with major fiscal crisis. Now, keep this in mind that if somebody says that this means that China becomes very weak, no. Despite this, China will be one of the strongest forces in the world, economic as well as military terms. it will still be a threat as far as India is concerned. But it's creating opportunities for India. If we can grow at 8 or 9% over the next couple of decades, then we might start hoping to catch up with China. Couple of decades, not 2 or 3 years. That will depend largely on, I would say partly, not largely, but partly on policy stability, government stability, etc. Now, that is part of the reason why people are hopeful about India in 2024. That India will have a relatively stable type of scenario. I don't know how true that will be. Elections are always unpredictable. Elections are never easy to sort of foresee. 2004, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was considered a swing. There was no doubt that he would be the Prime Minister after the 2004 Lok Sabha election, 20 years ago. And remember what happened. BJP lost the election. So that political stability is not guaranteed. But on the other hand, I would also say this, that even if the government changes, I would imagine that people will be responsible enough to continue with good policies. You should not take this approach that only the BJP can have good policies. Even the DMK or let's say even more than that, I would say the Biju Janata Dal, for example, have very good policies. Odisha at one time was worse off than Bihar. It is now much better off than Bihar. Think of it that way.
Sir, I had a small query.
Yes.
Sir, as far as I know, the nominal exchange rate for the Chinese currency has been stable for, it is, I think, around 1 USD is 7 Chinese yuan. So what do you actually mean by weak currency in the slide?
Weak currency means the Chinese currency has been weakening with respect to other currencies. The Chinese central bank has been intervening to support the currency or to maintain it at a certain level. By the way, IMF has accused RBI also of doing the same thing. That RBI has also been intervening. This is one of the latest IMF reports that India.
So they use the term dirty floating, I guess.
Pardon? I didn't catch what you said at the end. What did you say?
Sir, I think they use the term dirty floating. That's what the central bank.
Dirty floating is the older term. Now I think they've used some other term. But they've basically been saying that India has now become a much more interventionist country. Now, China is far more interventionist than India here in this respect. Of course, they have much bigger foreign exchange reserves also. So that's another reason why they are better off. I think we'll draw this to a close today, particularly because my throat is slightly affected, as you've been seeing. I hope you benefited from some of these discussions, and maybe we might have another session on these and other issues also. I mean, it won't be just limited to economic issues. Sometime next week when I'm better as far as my throat and cold and cough are concerned. All right. So thank you. Nice to have talked to all of you. It was interesting. I hope you have also had some benefits. If you have some questions and comments, you can pass them on to Sankalp. I'll see how we can deal with them. All right.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Sir, can we get this PPT in the group?
Yes, you can get them from Sankalp. I'll give them a copy because maybe there are a few other things that are not dealt with. I wanted to briefly comment on Adani's also because I think that's also been a big issue in this year. The Adani factor in Indian economy and the various controversies involving the Adani group and a couple of other things. So you can get that and have a look at it. I'll make it available to Sankalp. They will provide it. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.